Hello, Professor Kent Lee here. In this video, I would like to talk about English vocabulary and why English is so difficult, especially the vocabulary, spelling, pronunciation. And this video is particularly for English majors or linguists, but it might help some others of you to know just why English is so hard for you if you're learning it as a second language. Basically, it's difficult because it's got a really complex history. And because of that, there's not a clear match between, say, the spelling and the pronunciation. And it makes learning vocabulary hard, and it makes writing and reading hard for some of you. The spelling and pronunciation may not make much sense to you unless you're a linguist. It makes sense to us linguists, but not to the average person, probably. Well, what is this difficult history? Well, where does English come from? No, not Latin. A lot of my students will say it's from Latin, and it's not. Latin had a profound influence on English, but that's not where English started, how it was born. Well, to look at this, we'll look at the different stages of English. We'll look at the Old English period, or the Anglo-Saxon period, and I'll explain that in a minute. Which is a form of Old Germanic or Old German. English really started as a form of Old Germanic. So Germanic refers to this language group of similar languages: English, German, Dutch, Swedish, Norwegian, Icelandic, and a few others. That's a Germanic family. So English began as a Germanic language a long time ago, and it sounded very different way back then. We'll talk about that. And then it undergoes a profound transformation and becomes Middle English, with a huge influx or infusion of Old French and Latin elements. And then over time, it kind of cooks together and undergoes a lot of changes and becomes Modern English, starting with kind of early Modern English, like the time of Shakespeare, what we call early Modern English, and then kind of contemporary English. And along the way, it undergoes a lot more influence and change due to the Renaissance and Enlightenment, and a lot of influence from Latin, Greek, and modern French. So let's look at the history. First of all, I'll talk about years, and when I, for example, talk about 400 AD or 40, not AD, but CE, or 44 BCE. Well, we don't really use AD and BC in academic context as much anymore, because those are based on religious abbreviations, and in academic context we prefer more non-biased or just academically appropriate terms that are neutral. And so instead of AD, we often say CE for the Common Era. So I'll talk about 400 CE, or CE 400, the year 400, and then the year 44 BCE. So in 44 BCE, thereabouts, Rome conquered England, the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire didn't leave its language behind, though, very much from this occupation. And they pulled out around 400 CE. Because around this time, Rome was being attacked on its eastern borders by various invading groups. So they needed to fight there. They pulled their armies out of England in order to fight attackers on in the eastern borders. So England is open around 400. So the Germanic tribes are not too far away. Northern Germany, Denmark, various Germanic tribes that spoke Old German dialects took advantage of the opportunity. The biggest tribes are the Angles and the Saxons, a bit of others too. So they go in and take over England, and pretty quickly their language becomes a separate language. It gains an identity as a separate language called Anglo-Saxon or Old English. And a lot of our really core vocabulary comes from this time, from the Anglo-Saxon stage of the language. Words like be, have, give, do, swim, swam, teach. Words like that. A lot of the really common everyday words, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and such, come from Old Germanic, from Old Anglo-Saxon. And the language is pretty stable like this for quite a while. If you heard it, if you hear it spoken, if you read, say, some old English literature in the original Anglo-Saxon or Old English language, it looks and sounds completely different. It's a totally different language. It sounds probably like German, because it is basically Old German. Then something big happened in the year 1066. The French invaded and took over England, specifically the Normans from the northern coast of France, like Normandy, the Battle of Hastings. And they spoke a variety of Old French, Old Norman, and Old French in general back then was still very similar to the Latin language that it came from. So this brought in a huge number of Old French and Latin words into the language. And it took some time for the two languages to blend together. So for a while you had a divided society. The rich ruling elite class spoke French. The lower class, the farmers and peasants, spoke Anglo-Saxon. Now this is why we sometimes have different words for different things in English. So for example, the ruling French class ate meat and used Old French words like beef and pork and veal and mutton for the meat. The Anglo-Saxon speaking farmers didn't get to eat the meat very much. They raised it so that the rich people could eat it. So they used Germanic terms, well, Anglo-Saxon terms for the animals, like cow and pig actually came later from Dutch, but anyway, calf, sheep, lamb, things like that. So that's why we have different words in English for things like food and for animals, cow, beef, pig and pork and things like that. That's why. Now over time, the two languages blended together into what we call Middle English. So by the time you read Geoffrey Chaucer, Canterbury Tales, that kind of stuff, it's Middle English. The two languages had blended together. The pronunciation was rather different. It sounded a bit more like French or Italian or Spanish if you heard it spoken with this mix of Germanic and French Latin vocabulary. Now, over time, the language underwent a lot of changes. It's too much to talk about here. But a lot of the grammar changed and became simpler. If you studied German, you notice that grammar is more complex than English. The English grammar over the centuries became simplified, and the pronunciation changed greatly, especially vowels, the way vowels are pronounced. It's very complicated, something called the Great Vowel Shift, which I'll have to explain in another video later, but it underwent profound changes in pronunciation and grammar, and the spelling didn't really catch up very much. The spelling didn't change very much. So by the time you get to Shakespeare, a lot of these changes had almost finished, had almost run their course, and so you've got a language with French, Latin, Germanic elements in it, and the spelling hadn't changed much after all these changes in pronunciation and grammar. So the spelling and pronunciation start to kind of get complicated. You've got one set of spelling and pronunciation patterns for French Latin words, another for the Anglo-Saxon words. What happens next? Well, by the time you get to Shakespeare and all these changes had kind of run their course, this leads to what we call modern English, or at least early modern English, like the time of Shakespeare. Then along come the Renaissance and Enlightenment. Renaissance is a word from French. Americans pronounce it Renaissance. The British often say Renaissance. The French say Renaissance in the original French. If you want to impress your friends at a party, you can say Renaissance. They'll think you're a snob. So at this time, there is this incredible revival and rebirth, a new interest in learning and discovery. Educated people at the time generally would have studied Latin and probably some Greek. And at this time, they are, with the rebirth in renewal of learning and new discovery, they are discovering new ideas, inventing new ideas, discovering new concepts in math and science and many fields, inventing new things. So they need a lot of new words for new inventions and discoveries and ideas. And all major fields of study were profoundly affected or even started at this time. So philosophy underwent massive changes as a field. modern science begins at this time. Modern medicine sort of begins at this time. Chemistry, everything, most everything starts here or is profoundly transformed. With all these changes, we need new words, especially words that will work, in different countries. So they can use the same word in Italy and have a similar word that translates well in German and England and France and such. So educated people knowing Latin and maybe some Greek started creating new words from Latin elements, sometimes Greek elements. And that's been happening ever since until even to today. We often make up new words for new discoveries in science from Latin or maybe Greek. Greek maybe more so in certain areas like medicine. You see some Greek elements there. But there's been a huge influx of Latin into the language since this time, so that today, due to either modern learning or the Old French period, about 2/3 of the English vocabulary, 2/3 of words in English are from Latin. It's kind of actually hard to count because some come from Greek to Latin into English, and then some come from Latin to Old French into English, or Latin, modern French. It's complicated, but basically about 2/3 of English words are from Latin in some way or another. Other things happen in the modern era, the era of modern English, that also shape English. French became kind of a universal world language for a while, in the 1600s into even the earlier 1900s. And it was referred to often as lingua franca. That's a Latin phrase that means French language. So lingua franca, though, has come to mean just world language or universal language. So today we describe English as a lingua franca, which is ironic. We say English is the lingua franca. It's the world language. It's the main language that's used universally in the world, in science, medicine, business, or whatever. But it's a Latin phrase meaning French language. So yes, with French as a lingua franca earlier, a lot of modern French words came into English, like baguette and employee. Now English has become the lingua franca, and along the way it has kind of borrowed words from so many other languages, dozens of languages, and I don't have time to really talk about that. And also, mass media, modern media have profoundly influenced English, as well as profoundly influenced the popularity of English, because of mass media, and from Hollywood to the internet, English has become a world language, as well as political and business reasons. English has become lingua franca, and it's also being influenced currently, probably more than anything, by Spanish, due to the influence of Latin American cultures and peoples in the US. Spanish is having a profound influence on English now. So English has been profoundly influenced by Spanish, French, German, Latin, and Greek, and to some degree from borrowings from other languages. And this is why English is so complicated. We have spelling patterns and pronunciation patterns from different languages. Most importantly, for our purposes, the Latin and the Old German spelling and pronunciation patterns. And again, with all these changes in the language, sometimes the spelling doesn't change, and so the spelling might reflect Old German as in Old French it was pronounced 1,000 years ago, which makes it harder. So, for example, when it comes, think about word stress. So, a word like difficult, main stress is on the first syllable. Actually, depends on how far it is from the end. Difficult, 3 syllables, 1, 2, 3 back. Especially with Latin words, which is the bulk of academic and professional vocabulary, technical vocabulary. If you see new words in some academic or technical context, you can guess maybe it's Latin, and so the main stress will be on the second or third syllable from the end. Difficult. Vocabulary. Frequency. Those are words from Latin. Main stress on the second or third syllable from the end. And then sometimes with shorter words, they might follow an Old German stress pattern, like second from the end for words like table, for nouns like table, or on the last syllable if it's for some verbs like case, subject, noun, subject, a verb, object, object, I object to this object, things like that. That doesn't always work. Occasionally you have like unusual stress patterns like Greek. So when I was young, the word kilometer first started to get used in American English more often, and it was first pronounced kilometer, which is a Greek pronunciation pattern, kilometer. Later on, as it became more popular, more common, it became kilometer. It became Latinized, sort of pronounced more like Latin, because it's more like a normal academic or professional word. You also see that in words like gigabyte and megabyte. That's a Greek pattern. But don't worry about that. Mainly just know if you see new technical and academic words, maybe the main stress will be on the second or third syllable from the end, and that vowel will tend to be longer or pronounced longer or louder, like vocabulary, difficult. That's why English is so difficult, and that's why writing in English is so difficult. So if you're learning English, should you learn also Spanish, French, Latin, Greek, German? Yeah, that might help if you have a lot of time. But yeah, there's no easy way to overcome this difficulty other than maybe exposing yourself to a lot of English, doing a lot of reading on your own, day after day, week after week, year after year, if you really need to improve your English, as well as exposing yourself to English media, maybe conversation, spending time in an English-speaking country or environment or something. But it's the most complicated vocabulary of any language in the world. If you consider common words and then words that are used in very special disciplines, words that might be found only in a technical chemistry dictionary of like 45-letter long chemistry words, old words and specialized words and place names, estimates are that English has about 1 million words. Now, the average native English speaker maybe would know somewhere like, 40 to 80,000, maybe more than 80,000 or 100,000 for a fairly educated speaker. You don't need to know 1 million words, don't worry. That's still a lot of words if you want to become really skilled at academic or professional English. So again, read a lot. It's the best thing I can tell you. This is why English is so complicated, especially reading and writing or pronunciation. It's got a very rich, crazy, fantastic, intricate, complex history, unlike maybe any other language that has ever existed. This sets the stage for the next video where I'll talk more about maybe improving your vocabulary in your writing or professional English. So until the next video, good luck, take care, goodbye.